The air conditioning unit in the West Wing private dining room hummed a low, monotonous D-flat, a frequency that felt less like cooling and more like constant, subtle pressure. It was the sound of institutional power, a tired machine breathing heavily in the humid Washington night. Outside, the last slivers of twilight were being swallowed by the heavy velvet drapes, which had probably cost more than the average American house. Inside, the light was strategic, pools of soft golden illumination, focused narrowly on the centerpiece, a single heavy mahogany table. This wasn't the state dining room, built for spectacle and hundreds of guests. This was a box, designed for confrontation, for secrets that could never leave the walls. And tonight, those walls held two men who, for decades, had defined the opposite poles of American cultural thought, united only by their mutual exhaustion with the spotlight: Bill Maher and Donald Trump. The meeting had been born not out of political necessity, but out of a sudden shattering moment of unintended vulnerability. A few weeks prior, the entire national narrative had wobbled on its axis. On a seemingly innocuous segment of The View, amidst a heated, predictable debate about political donations, Whoopi Goldberg had gone silent. Not the performative silence of a co-host waiting for a cue, but a true, devastating pause. Then, she had spoken. What she revealed was not policy or betrayal, but a quiet, deeply personal act of private assistance Donald Trump had rendered her years ago. A complex business issue, a potential personal disaster averted, handled without fanfare, without demanding future political allegiance, simply dealt with. The camera had lingered on her face, and for that sliver of time, the political warrior Whoopi dissolved into a grateful human being. The clip went immediately viral, titled with brutal, effective simplicity, "The View Goes Silent." That silence, that profound, uncomfortable vacuum of nuance in an era defined by screaming absolutes, was the gravity that pulled Maher into this room. Maher, the intellectual provocateur, the man who made his living drawing sharp, unwavering lines between right and wrong, found himself deeply unsettled. If the caricature he helped paint of Trump was capable of quiet, effective compassion, what did that say about the entire narrative he had dedicated his life to reinforcing? Bill Maher arrived precisely on time, 7:58 p.m. He hated being late. He hated the feeling of being managed. He was wearing an expensive, tailored dark suit, slightly rumpled from the flight. His tie was loosened slightly, a concession to the informal nature of this highly formal interaction. He sat at the large, polished table. The surface of the wood was cool beneath his fingertips, so smooth it felt like dense glass. He ran his hand over the grain, thinking about the number of high-stakes decisions, the weight of history that this single piece of furniture had absorbed. A waiter, thin and impeccably dressed, had placed a carafe of black coffee, still steaming faintly, and a small plate of unmarked crackers and artisanal cheese, the kind of deliberately neutral, non-messy food designed for people who were too tense to eat. Maher didn't touch the coffee. He reached into his inner pocket, pulling out a small folded piece of paper. Not notes, but a single column of talking points, distilled down to 3 essential questions. He didn't need the paper. He needed the ritual. He needed the physical anchor against the swirling uncertainty of the evening. Am I complicit? That was the silent question beating in his chest. By simplifying him, have I simplified myself? He listened to the silence again. Beyond the faint D-flat hum, he could detect the distant, intermittent crackle of a Secret Service radio, muffled behind the heavy door. The smell in the room was a complex blend of old parchment, expensive leather furniture, and a faint, metallic tang, the residue of ozone and historical weight. Maher shifted in his seat. The chair was deep, designed to swallow its occupants, to encourage intimacy or exhaustion. He looked at the empty seat across from him. This meeting had been agonizingly negotiated. Maher insisted on no staff, no recording devices, no handlers, just 2 men. The negotiation itself was a psychological battle. Maher seeking intellectual honesty, Trump perhaps seeking validation, or simply a momentary escape from the prison of his own persona. The clock on the wall, a heavy brass timepiece, registered 8:01 p.m. The door swung open silently. Trump entered the room. The atmosphere didn't just change. The physics of the room seemed to adjust. The air became denser, heavier, with the distinct manufactured energy that followed the man wherever he went. He wore a crisp suit, perhaps less formal than Mars, but radiating an expensive, almost defiant cleanliness. "Bill, good of you to come." Trump's voice, usually a booming instrument of rally power, was surprisingly subdued here, adjusted for the intimate acoustics of the private room. Maher stood, offering a hand across the corner of the table. Their handshake was brief, firm, and entirely devoid of warmth, a necessary professional transaction between adversaries. "Mr. President," Maher replied, his voice measured, perhaps a degree too calm. Trump waved a dismissive hand at the formality. "Please, Donald, you know I watch the show, Bill. Always sharp, sometimes unfair, but always sharp." Maher allowed a thin, non-committal smile to cross his lips. He sat back down, watching Trump settle into the opposing chair. Trump immediately reached for the carafe, pouring himself a half cup of the cooling black coffee. He didn't offer any to Maher, nor did he ask if he wanted anything, a small but telling detail of the transactional nature of the interaction. "So," Trump began, taking a loud sip of the coffee, "a quiet night. We needed a quiet night, frankly. You know, you see all the noise out there, Bill. The noise is incredible." Maher leaned forward, resting his elbows on the cool, unforgiving surface of the mahogany. "That noise, Donald, is partially our shared industry, and partially, it's the price of the presidency." They spent the first 12 minutes circling the perimeter. They talked about New York real estate in the 1980s, a shared cultural touchstone. They discussed the ratings business, the relentless pressure of delivering spectacle every week. Maher noted the bags under Trump's eyes, not dark but subtly puffy, the telltale sign of chronic sleep deprivation that no amount of foundation could fully mask. For a moment, the personas cracked. They were just two tired men, bonded by the experience of decades spent under the unforgiving lens of public scrutiny. But Maher hadn't flown across the country for nostalgia. He had flown for clarity. He cleared his throat, the small sound echoing far louder than it should have in the stillness. "Donald," Maher began, the tone shifting from amicable adversary to serious interrogator. "I want to talk about the silence." Trump squinted, tilting his head slightly. "The silence? What silence, Bill? There's never any silence." "Yes, there is," Maher insisted, pushing the point gently like the tip of a rapier. "There was the silence on The View. After Whoopi spoke, the shift in Trump's demeanor was immediate and profound. His shoulders, which had been marginally relaxed, tightened. He put down his coffee cup with a decisive thud that broke the conversational flow. He looked directly at Maher, the famous unblinking intensity now fully deployed. "Ah, that," Trump paused, searching for the right words, a rare instance of visible deliberation. "She shouldn't have done that, you know. It wasn't necessary." "Why wasn't it necessary?" Maher pressed, his internal monologue screaming, "This is the moment. Don't back down." It was a human moment, a moment that complicated the entire simple narrative that everyone uses to define you. The narrative I use, I admit. You helped someone, quietly, effectively, with great discretion. Why do you need that humanity to be a secret? Trump sighed, a long, weary exhalation that deflated some of the air from the room. It was the sound of someone who carried the weight of 1,000 public battles. Because, Bill, if you're honest about it, complexity doesn't scale. It doesn't poll well. If I'm just a guy who sometimes helps a celebrity rival with her taxes, then I'm weak. I'm inconsistent. I'm not the fighter. I'm not the brand. Maher sat back, processing this admission. It was not a political defense. It was a pure, cold analysis of branding and perception management. So you're saying that the persona, the relentless fighter, the name-caller, the force of nature, is a strategic necessity? That the private man is actively suppressed by the public figure? The private man, Trump repeated, a faint, almost melancholy irony touching his voice, would lose the election by Tuesday. The private man is boring. He's tired. He needs to sleep 8 hours. The public figure, Bill, the brand, that man is tireless. That man is the show. Maher leaned forward again, captivated. The silence between them now was deep, a true intellectual stillness. Maher took a sip of the lukewarm coffee, finding the bitter taste grounding. But the cost, Donald. That moment with Whoopi proved that people are desperate for evidence of the third dimension. We are all living in a two-dimensional world, defined by tweets and 5-second sound bites. That revelation, that you could show private compassion, It unsettled my audience. It unsettled me. It showed that perhaps the battle we are fighting isn't just policy, but perception. Trump nodded slowly, his gaze drifting past Maher toward the heavy drapes, as if contemplating the millions of people waiting just beyond the glass. Perception is the only policy that matters, Bill. You know that. You make your living based on the precision of your perception. Whoopi revealed a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities are weapons in this town. If I'm seen as someone who can be kind, then I can be leveraged. I have to be perceived as immovable, or the entire edifice collapses. Maher steepled his fingers, staring over them at the president. He thought of his own public persona, the cynical intellectual atheist, always ready with a devastating critique. How often did he suppress his own moments of doubt, his own glimpses of compassion, to stay true to his brand? Let me ask you a strategic question then, Maher challenged, pushing past the philosophy toward the raw mechanics of power. Did you ever regret allowing that narrative of relentless aggression to dominate? Did you ever wish you could simply apologize for something, or show a moment of genuine, unscripted kindness without calculating the political fallout? Trump shifted in his heavy chair, the slight scraping sound of the polished leather against the wood floor a jarring intrusion on the quiet. He paused for what felt like an eternity. Maher focused on the minute tremor in Trump's left hand, resting on the table, the only physical sign of the immense pressure boiling beneath the composed surface. Regret? Trump finally said, the word heavy and slightly muffled. Regret is for people who lose. I win. That's the calculation, but look, Bill. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice further, forcing Maher to strain to hear, creating an illusion of shared intimacy. The pace is brutal, the constant performance. There's a quiet satisfaction in doing something simple, something where the only result is that it helps someone. The Whoopi thing, it was just a problem that needed fixing. It wasn't politics, and the fact that it stayed quiet for years, that's the real victory. Not the help itself, but the discretion. He paused, looking Maher straight in the eye, a direct, unfiltered look that cut through the rhetorical armor both men habitually wore. The greatest gift you can give someone in this business, Bill, is to solve their problem without expecting them to stand next to you at the podium afterwards. That admission hung in the air, potent and toxic. It redefined the entire interaction. It suggested that both the president and the comedian were merely players in a grand, exhausting theatrical production, forever shackled to the roles they had mastered. Maher picked up his notepaper again, crinkling the edges slightly. He didn't need the other two questions. The first one had yielded everything. He had sought the man behind the curtain and found not a monster, but a deeply fatigued professional hostage to a persona he couldn't afford to shed. The public reaction to that moment, Donald, was intense, Maher observed, shifting gears to the analysis phase. For 3 days, the left was terrified, the right was confused. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, our divisions aren't absolute. That we've been played by a system that demands simple heroes and simple villains. Trump smirked, a quick, familiar gesture. And you love the simple villain, Bill. It drives your ratings. It's a symbiotic relationship. I'll grant you that. Maher conceded, nodding slowly. We need the villain, and the villain needs us to maintain his opposition status. But at what point does that system collapse? When does the exhaustion become too much for the audience? Or for the performers? Trump didn't answer directly. He stood up, signaling the inevitable end of the meeting. The unspoken rule in these high-level private discussions is that the power dynamic determines the clock. Bill, Trump said, his voice returning to its slightly more amplified public cadence. It was good to see you. You keep doing what you do. Keep them talking. He offered his hand again. Maher rose, accepting the handshake. It felt exactly as it did before. Cold, firm, and entirely professional. I will, Maher promised. And perhaps one day the real story won't be the fights, but the quiet moments of assistance, like what you did for Whoopi. Trump only smiled, a complex, unreadable expression that contained layers of fatigue, self-awareness, and relentless calculation. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door ajar, letting in a momentary gust of the outside world, before the unseen handler swiftly and silently closed it again. The heavy D-flat hum of the AC immediately returned to dominance. Maher stood there for a full minute, alone in the golden light. He didn't touch the coffee again. He simply listened to the silence, now different. It was the silence of revelation, the lingering aftertaste of truth. The leak was inevitable. Not a direct quote, but the fact of the meeting itself. Within hours, a carefully placed snippet landed in the digital ether. Maher met with Trump in a private, unrecorded dinner at the White House, discussing the fallout from the Whoopi Goldberg revelation. The impact was instantaneous and ferocious. The media erupts. The next morning's headlines were a symphony of outrage and analysis. Politico. Maher's betrayal. The left reels after comedian seeks nuance in West Wing. The Vox News. Unexpected ally. Maher confirms Trump's private acts of charity. The Daily Beast. The View co-host silent. Did Whoopi know her revelation would open the door for Trump's image rehab? Breitbart. Even the elite media knows Trump is a good guy, say sources close to White House. Maher's inbox was instantaneously saturated with fury. His progressive base felt abandoned, viewing the meeting not as a pursuit of truth, but as a dangerous normalization of the adversary. You gave him legitimacy, was the most common accusation, followed by the chilling subtext, you broke the narrative we need to win. On social media, the chaos was distilled into bitter, potent memes. One viral image showed Maher shaking hands with Trump, overlaid with the caption, "Welcome to the center, Bill. We have nuance now." The digital world, designed for division, simply could not process the idea that a conversation between enemies could be productive, let alone humanizing. The Whoopi story, which had been simmering as a quiet cultural anomaly, suddenly reignited with blinding force. Pundits debated relentlessly. Was the private favor a calculated long-term investment, or simply a moment of genuine human decency? The sheer ambiguity was maddening to a world addicted to binary definitions. Meanwhile, far from the polished mahogany of the West Wing, the news landed differently. In a small diner in Wichita, Kansas, a retired veteran named Arthur, who admired Trump's tough talk but was alienated by the constant media warfare, read the headline on his phone. He paused mid-bite of his toast. "See, Marge," he muttered to his wife. "He's not just the guy they show on TV. He's complex." For Arthur, the story provided necessary moral cushioning, allowing him to support the politician without feeling obligated to endorse the entire spectacle. In an elementary school teacher's lounge in Portland, Oregon, a group of teachers watched a clip of the Maher-Trump discussion unfold on a break room TV. They were overwhelmingly anti-Trump, but the sight of Maher, their champion, wrestling with the implications of the Whoopi revelation, forced a painful internal reckoning. "It's exhausting," sighed Sarah, the fourth-grade teacher. "The idea that we have to hate everyone all the time. If even Maher is looking for the human being in the room, maybe we're all just tired of the two-sided cage fight." The true impact of the secret meeting wasn't policy change, but cultural fatigue. The incident cracked the veneer of absolute certainty, forcing people on both sides to momentarily question their definitions of the enemy. The entire political apparatus relies on simplifying the other side until they are easily demonized. The Whoopi revelation, amplified by the Maher meeting, was an electric shock that introduced ambiguity back into the system. The reflection, the cost of the persona. Maher devoted the final segment of his next show to the dinner, bypassing his usual rapid-fire monologue for a deep, almost melancholic meditation on the nature of truth. "They say that the revolution will not be televised," Maher narrated to his camera. "I'm starting to think the truth won't be either. It won't be televised because the camera demands a performance and the internet demands a villain. And the truth, I discovered in that private dining room, is that everyone is exhausted by the performance." He recounted the specifics of the conversation. The way Trump admitted that the private man was too weak and inconsistent to survive the political machinery. It was an astonishing admission of self-imprisonment. Both Bill Maher and Donald Trump, in their separate spheres, had built empires on being unwavering. Maher on his principled cynicism, Trump on his defiant aggression. The secret dinner revealed that this unwavering front was the ultimate vulnerability. They were both trapped by the success of their own brands. The Whoopi incident was just a glitch in the matrix, A moment when the internal firewall failed, revealing the humanity that both men had diligently suppressed for decades. This is the hidden cost of our viral age. We demand perfection, consistency, and clear definition. We demand simple heroes and simple villains. And in that demand, we force complexity underground. We ensure that the quiet, helpful moments, the human connections, the private acts of grace, must remain secrets, because the minute they are exposed, they threaten to dismantle the profitable, exhilarating edifice of conflict. The dinner changed nothing politically, but it changed everything culturally. It served as a powerful reminder that if we want genuine understanding, we must stop demanding that people fit perfectly into the narratives we construct for them. We must allow for the contradiction. We must tolerate the uncomfortable, clarifying silence. The world needs more people like this. Share if you agree.